Hey everyone, Ben Coomber Radio, episode number 241. So we're well into 2017. We've already been talking and exploring the kind of goal setting stuff and actually around the conversation of weight maintenance, because 2017 or the beginning of a year is always a conversation around weight maintenance, people kind of trying to re-regulate where they're at after the Christmas period and all that kind of stuff. So today is not going to be anything fluffy. Today is going to be very scientific. I have a very brainy person on board. He's far more clever than me, far more letters behind the name, understands numbers, which I don't, which I'm very excited about. I followed the man's work for a while. He owns a very good blog called Weightology. James Krieger, hello.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Did I pronounce your second name right?
Yes, you did.
I always have to check. I don't like to be rude. I don't want you to sit there thinking, man, that jackass just said my name wrong. We're off on a bad foot. James, let me give you an opportunity to tell the audience who you are, what's the background, and what's led you into the big interest that you have in the science of nutrition.
Yeah, so I've got a couple master's degrees, one master's degree in exercise science and the other in nutrition. I've been in the fitness industry since the mid-90s. I remember the days being on an old message board called MFW or MIC.fitness.weights. It was like a news group that Lyle McDonald was on it. This is a long time ago. So that was my first, experience, meeting some other people in the industry. And I went out, got my degrees and everything. And I went on to be the research director for a corporate weight management program that basically treats Microsoft employees. And our average weight loss was about 40 pounds in 3 months, so it was a very successful program. And really the past number of years I've been collaborating a lot with guys like Brad Schoenfeld, Alan Aragon, guys like that. We've been collaborating on research, got a number of publications that have come out in the past few years. We've got more on the way. I've got my website, Weightology, and been doing that. And yeah, I've had my fingers in a lot of different areas in the fitness industry, but definitely always been really focused on the science part of things. So,
okay, now I like that. I'm a big fan of the blog. It serves probably for me as a bit of a central point for clarification on many different scientific principles, and I love the fact that you're always willing to go out of your way and create debate with people, because not many people like to do that, and I'll say that a lot of people don't actually do it in the right way, and you engage debate in the right way for debate's purposes. Now, in terms of your blog, when and how did it come about, and what was the key purpose behind it? Were you just off on your own crusade to say, look, I need to create clarification in the marketplace, I want to write about this kind of stuff? How did it come about?
It came about because, it was actually around the the whole market crash, the real estate market crash in 2008. And so, people were losing their jobs and stuff. And so actually, that weight management program that I was working for, they basically did a bunch of downsizing, and I wasn't really a necessary position for the program. So I ended up losing my job there. And so I had to find something else to kind of keep the whole fitness thing going. So I decided to, and I saw that Alan Aragon had a blog and some other people, and so I decided maybe I would start writing one, and I thought it would be a good avenue for me to get my name out there more, and so I think that was the initial driving force behind setting up the website and getting it going that way, and kind of just trying to spread the word of evidence-based, fitness and nutrition. So.
Now, I don't know if you've heard of Danny Lennon before. I think you've been on.
Yes.
You've been on his podcast.
Yes, I was on his podcast 1 or 2 years ago. Yeah.
Yeah. So me and Danny were speaking about the term evidence-based nutrition recently, because I agree with it, but I agree with it to a degree, and I think it's used as an empowerment technique for a lot of people to just close down an argument and not really explore anything. Where do you see the real application of evidence-based nutrition? I suppose almost how would you teach that word or explain it?
I think it's interesting because actually Brett Contreras and I have an article coming out very soon on this kind of ties in nicely with that, on individual responses to exercise and nutrition and things like that. And so when we talk about research and evidence-based, what we're talking about really here is kind of a guideline, I think, for the most part. The thing about exercise and nutrition is that, research can in general give us guidelines on what might be a best practice, for example, but they're just guidelines. They can't necessarily tell us exactly how things are going to work for an individual. They kind of give you a starting point, and then you can work from there. Science is still in its infancy, I would say, in determining individual responses. And, this article we got coming out, one of the things I talk about is the appetite response to exercise. So, like, the thing is, when we talk about research deals in averages, typically. They report averages, which is nice, but it doesn't tell you what's going to happen on individuals. So, for example, there's this one really interesting study where they looked at, they had people do a really low intensity cardio session, and then they basically looked at their appetite response to that. And on average, people did not compensate for the exercise. So what I mean by that is the people, the exercise didn't make them hungry, so then they ate a bunch of food to basically make up for the exercise they just did. So if you look at the average, you say, okay, well, exercise doesn't really make people eat more. On average, it's going to create an energy deficit. But the interesting about the study is they actually looked at the individual responses and graphed them out. And there was a big variation in individual responses where some people ended up actually overeating after the exercise, so they actually ended up in a surplus, while some people ended up in a deficit, and it was kind of all over the place. So what that indicates is, there's an individual aspect to exercise and nutrition that I would say when we talk about evidence-based, we can't totally capture that individual aspect. And that's where I think when you're a coach or personal trainer, that's where I think personal experience comes into play, and just seeing how your client responds to certain things comes into play. So when I say, evidence-based, what we're talking about is, is there a guideline in terms of science that kind of dictates best practice, that dictates a starting point where you can go from, but still ultimately you have to kind of tease out what's good for the individual, and that can vary widely from one person to the next.
After all, that is the art of coaching, right?
Yes.
Exactly.
Yes.
Okay, so I have rooted around your blog in the past, and I picked up doing my research as an interviewer today on your blog, and kind of saw what was kind of popping up on your blog, and something that we've covered in the past on the podcast, but not in any scientific detail, because it kind of caught us by surprise, so we didn't delve into it, is the topic of aspartame.
Yeah.
Now, this is a great conversation starter, especially in America. People love saying it's evil, it's going to give you cancer, it's going to ruin your life. Now, give us a little bit of a taste of the science, and the reason why I don't want to overstep the mark is these articles are in the paid area of your website, so I don't want you to feel that you're kind of giving away the money shots here. But where do we sit with aspartame in the research, and can we safely consume it and not die?
Yeah, it's so funny. I mean, you do a Google search on aspartame, and all the stuff comes up, and that's the downside of what we'd call Google University. I mean, your average person just is not able to discern what is good information and what isn't. And I think the thing about aspartame, it plays into this idea, before I get into maybe some of the reason why we don't need to worry about it, but it plays into this idea that it's a common concept people have that somehow natural is better and natural is safer, which is a complete myth, because things like arsenic are totally natural but highly poisonous. Just because something's natural doesn't mean it's safe, and just because something's artificial doesn't mean it's somehow dangerous or any more inherently dangerous. And one thing I've noted in the past is that when we talk about artificial versus natural ingredients, number one, there's no it's hard to make a distinction on what is actually natural or artificial because, for example, let's say I take bread. Let's say I bake some bread. And the ingredients I use are, flour and water and all these things to make the bread. Well, all the ingredients I'm using to make that bread can be considered natural. But bread is not something you can't just go out in the forest and find some bread that's just grown spontaneously. It took man-made intervention to create that bread. And so then the question is bread natural or is it artificial? Because there's no, if we define something as something that's been man-made, well, bread would actually be technically artificial, even though the ingredients can be considered natural. And so that's the other thing that we have to consider here is the, aspartame, for example. Aspartame is actually made up of 3 naturally occurring amino acids that are present in our diet all the time. It's just that we've synthesized the aspartame from those amino acids. So is aspartame natural or artificial? Because it's basically made from natural ingredients. So there's that sense. But it plays on that. It plays into people's fears of artificial things. If I want to get into aspartame, the bottom line is when I consume aspartame, it's broken down into its amino acids that it was made up of, and then methanol, and none of those things are harmful. Now, methanol in high doses, methanol is basically wood alcohol, is toxic in high doses, but we consume methanol all the time. And if you eat an apple, you're getting a little bit of methanol, but the amounts are so small that they basically provide there's no harm to you. You can drink orange juice, you're getting methanol. And the amount of methanol you get from aspartame is actually less than what you would get from orange juice and apple and things like that. So there's really no physiological rationale why aspartame would be harmful, but people want to play into this idea that, that it's going to harm you for some reason. So
now I love that response. And I suppose my only counter to that currently, from what I've seen in the research and arguments that present worthwhile debate, is does aspartame affect gut bacteria? Is that an area that have you started to look at that side of aspartame yet?
Yes, I have, and the thing about the gut bacteria is that it hasn't really translated to. There's a lot of things that affect gut bacteria, not just sweeteners, not just artificial sweeteners, and there's no evidence that any changes in gut bacteria that, number one, that they're of any health significance, and that they would pose any harm. I mean, there's just I'm very skeptical of the gut bacteria argument because some of it's based on rodent research and of the research that's been done on humans. Like there was one study, they didn't use aspartame, but they used sucralose, and it had all kinds of problems with the study itself. Had all kinds of problems in the methodology. So I'm skeptical of the impact on gut bacteria and health because there's a lot of things that have been shown to affect gut bacteria that are perfectly natural as well. And so, I would say that, until somebody shows me that these small changes in gut bacteria that they have shown could somehow have significant health impacts, which no one's shown that, it's to me they're meaningless changes, really, in my opinion.
Okay, that's cool. I'll take that. Now looking at another area. Now I think this is probably going to take us a while to discuss because this is kind of your bread and butter. I sort of mentioned at the beginning that kind of insulin, weight maintenance, kind of this carbohydrate notion around low carb dieting is kind of an area that you've talked about an awful lot, and it's actually the way that I discovered your work. Now, one of the articles that you've posted recently was kind of a rebuttal to Gary Taubes and his work, which you've kind of criticised in the past or started debate, I'll say. Now, where kind of I want to kind of almost give you the floor because I know you will have the spiel that you like to give on this area. Where do we sit with the science on weight maintenance, the role of carbohydrates and its effect on weight maintenance, and I suppose we'll tie into that insulin, and kind of where people should almost balance their stress around what they should actually do with their diet?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I mean, so when it comes to carbs, I mean, Taubes was like 100% wrong with his old book, Good Calories, Bad Calories. Of course, he's got a new book out now called The Science of, or not The Science of Sugar, but The Case Against Sugar, which I'll maybe discuss here in a little bit. But in regards to carbohydrates, all the data shows there's really no relationship between carbohydrate intake and body weight. And in fact, if you look at observational research, it's been shown that higher carbohydrate intakes usually tend to be associated with lower body weights, but that's observational data, not controlled trials. So the bottom line is, when it comes to carbohydrate intake, for a given level of protein intake, if your protein intake is steady and controlled, there's no, whether I have a high fat, low carb or high carb, low fat, as long as I'm consuming the same number of calories, it's not really going to have any effect on my body fat or body weight. Now, Taubes and other people, they're kind of all over the place with their arguments. First they'll say, well, carbs will somehow make you fat, independent of your calorie intake. It'll maybe have some type of recomposition effect. That's been shown time and time again to be false, especially, just with a couple studies that Taubes, basically his group helped fund. Kevin Hall's research, basically, these were metabolic ward studies. They had people, the food intake was tightly controlled. They compared low carbohydrate to high carbohydrate. The protein intake was controlled. And low carb had no effect on body fat. In fact, there was a temporary slowing of fat loss when people switched to a very low carbohydrate diet, and then it kind of picked back up to a normal rate. But so from a body composition perspective, it's not going to affect your body comp. There's not going to be some type of recomposition effect where if I go low carb but eating the same number of calories, I'm going to lose more fat. That's not true. So from that perspective, whether you eat high carb or low carb, it's really just a matter of personal preference. Now, obviously, there's certain types of carbohydrate that, and this is where Gary kind of shifts the goalposts. For all this time, he was all about carbohydrate and everything. Then he kind of switched over to refined carbohydrate, and now his thing is on sugar. And I actually just gave a big presentation on sugar at the AFPT conference in Norway just recently, and I went into all the research on sugar intake and everything. Here's Taubes. He keeps changing his argument. And I think when he realized that the low carb, high carb argument wasn't working anymore, now he's gone on to sugar. And the thing about sugar is that it's actually similar to carbohydrate. Whether you eat high sugar or low sugar, again, it's actually not going to impact your body composition. You could actually eat a very high sugar diet and still get really lean if you control your calorie intake. Now, where sugar can be a problem is that it basically enhances the palatability of food. People like sweet-tasting food. It makes the food taste good, and so we eat more of it, really. It's not rocket science. And also high sugar foods tend to be very energy dense. Usually they're packaged with fat as well. So, things like peanut butter cups and different types of candies and cakes and things are both high fat and high sugar. So they're very energy dense. And we also know that foods that are very energy dense are not as satiating. We tend to eat more of them. And so really there's nothing inherently fattening about sugar. It's just that it makes the foods taste good. It tends to be incorporated into very energy-dense foods, and so we tend to overeat foods that are high in sugar in that sense. Now, Gary will also make the argument that sugar is addicting, and there's really, he's taking animal data to suggest that, and it's sugar is not inherently addicting in a sense. Not in the sense that drugs are addicting. I challenge anyone who thinks they're addicted to sugar to basically, if someone tells me you're addicted to sugar, I say, okay, how about I put just a bag of sugar in front of you with a spoon? I want to see if you're going to just start eating that. No, people that are addicted to sugar or consider themselves addicted to sugar, they aren't going to take bags of sugar and start spooning it in their mouth. You know, basically they more have a sensitivity to very pleasurable food, you know, which is usually high fat, high sugar food, but it's not the sugar itself, and it's not inherently addicting in a sense. So sugar, you know, carbohydrate, sugar, they aren't inherently going to make you fat. It still comes down to energy balance. Yes, there are some aspects of some high sugar foods that can encourage you to overeat just because it tastes good. But that's really what it comes down to. There's nothing, you know, I think a lot of people would obviously benefit by reducing their sugar intake, but that's just because, you know, the byproduct for reducing your sugar intake is you reduce your calorie intake usually because now you're not eating those energy dense foods. So it's not that there was anything inherently bad about the sugar itself. So.
Okay, so with that in mind, let's say someone's eating a diet where weight is stable, they have a calorie intake that is enabling them to maintain that weight. If you eat a high carb diet, so let's just say for argument's sake, this diet is 25% protein, 10% fat and the rest are carbs, really high carb.
Yeah.
Would that have any detrimental effect, seeing as, in theory, that is a insulinogenic diet because of carbohydrates' effect on insulin, and we know, of course, protein has an effect on insulin as well. Is there any argument there?
No, there's not, because here's the deal with insulin. Insulin cannot just synthesize fat out of nothing. You know, you can't. You know, let's say that I'm on a high carb diet and I'm maintaining weight and everything. It's not going to synthesize fat out of nothing. And so, you know, for me to actually gain body fat, you know, I have to, you know, that body fat, any new body fat I add is basically made up of carbon atoms. Those carbon atoms have to come from somewhere. They don't just come from nowhere. And some people say, well, they come from the carbohydrate. Well, they could come from fat too, or they could come from protein. You know, the source doesn't matter. You know, you still have to be eating more than you're expending, you know, and the hormones and things like that, they don't matter. I could be on a low insulin diet, you know, in the same scenario you just gave me. Let's say I reversed it and I'm very low carb and very high fat, and insulin levels are very low. And someone will argue, someone who's a big proponent of the insulin hypothesis and stuff will say, well, insulin levels are low, your body won't be able to synthesize fat. That's totally false. Your body has other mechanisms to synthesize fat from fat that have nothing to do with insulin. What people don't realize is there's a lot of different pathways in your body. Insulin is just one pathway that basically helps regulate fat metabolism, but there's a lot of other pathways that regulate fat metabolism that have nothing to do with insulin. And those pathways will take over even if you're on a low carb diet, but you're eating a lot of calories. So you can't trick your body, you know, in that sense. You know, if I eat a lot of fat, yeah, my insulin levels might be low, but that fat can just still go straight to fat tissue through other mechanisms, and that's been shown in a number of studies. And there's been overfeeding studies. There's one specific overfeeding study where they overfed people different types of sugar and also overfed them fat, and the people gained the same amount of fat in every same instance, even though insulin levels were way higher in the carbohydrate conditions versus the fat condition. So again, you can't trick your body. It's going to be, you've got to, if you're going to gain, you're going to gain body fat whether you overeat carbs or whether you overeat fat. Now, if you overeat protein, some people might argue, well, you get a thermogenic effect, so you may not gain as much fat from overeating on protein, which is true. There's also the satiety benefit of protein, so it's a lot harder to overeat on protein just because it makes you feel fuller. But you can still get fat overeating on protein as well. So especially, if you're just, consuming, say energy-dense protein sources, or you're just drinking liquid sources of protein all day and just downing, just making it easy for you to consume. You can overconsume on protein and get fat that way as well. So, so people need to take these mechanisms like insulin don't operate in a vacuum. I think that's what a lot of people don't forget. insulin doesn't operate in a vacuum. There are literally dozens and dozens of hormones all acting at the same time as insulin, and some of these hormones are counteracting insulin. Some of them are acting synergistically with insulin. And so you can't just look at insulin in a vacuum and say, oh, insulin level's up, that means I can't lose fat. That's not true, because there's a lot of other things happening at the same time. So,
well, we'll mic drop on that one, and we'll kind of, I suppose, wrap up my last question on weight maintenance, which I think this will always happen, right? We'll always kind of be looking at compounds and ways that there is an effect on weight. Like, can I take X and can I get a little boost? Now, let's say we're all eating diets that maintain our weight. The context is fixed. Is there anything else in your eyes that affects weight loss? Now, I get that calorie balance is the most significant thing. We've covered that. But people are always looking for micro advantages, right? We're always looking for 2, 3, 4% of gain. We often talk about vitamin D, protein intake, calcium, green tea. There's many weight loss supplements. What else is there that we can actually say, well, actually there's 2, 3, 4% of benefit there. So if the cost is there and you want to roll with that, you might end up taking X or doing X.
I can't really think of anything that's, anything that's really going to give a benefit has already been, shown. Like I said, we know high protein intake can give you a boost. You'll get a slight energy expenditure boost. You'll obviously get the appetite impact as well. We know ephedrine and ephedra caffeine stacks, things like that, are effective. They not only boost your energy expenditure a little bit, but they also suppress appetite. So there's a dual whammy there. But beyond those things, and then obviously, just the things that you really should do, resistance training, obviously, to maintain lean mass and things like that. There's really nothing that I would say that that will just give you any type of noticeable edge. Some people will talk about, oh, you need to do interval training and things like that, because that'll give you a big boost in your energy expenditure. And I actually covered that gave a lecture at the University of Bath back in April and talked about that. And interval training does not boost your energy expenditure nearly as much as people think it does. In fact, the post-exercise energy expenditure you get from interval training is pretty small. And it's certainly not enough to really give you a significant fat loss advantage. Where interval training might help, there's some research that shows it may help suppress appetite, although that data is not consistent. So, and I think this is where you start to get individual responses again. I think, let's say again, let's take interval training, for example. Might be a really great tool for some people. Maybe they get a nice appetite suppression, they feel good and everything. But some other people, maybe it wipes them out so much that they end up just sitting around the rest of the day, and then their NEAT levels or non-exercise activity thermogenesis levels go down, and so then they basically cancel out the benefits of the exercise. So, and that's the thing I also want to note is that the big impact of NEAT. NEAT is so important. I mean, I've given multiple lectures on it. NEAT is so important to fat loss and weight loss and long-term weight maintenance, and I think it continues to be an underappreciated component of fat loss. I think too many people they look at what they're doing in the gym, they look at their diet, but they don't realize that what you're doing, those other 23 hours of the day you're not in the gym, makes a difference. And the energy you expend, because you could have a great workout. Go have a good workout, things like that. But if you just sit around the rest of the day, you've canceled out the energy expenditure benefit of that workout. So, energy expenditure is a 24-hour thing. It's not just a 1-hour thing you do in the gym. So I think that's important. Also, if we talk about, I was talking about NEAT. And I had one other thing that was, when I was talking about NEAT, I had another thing in the back of my mind, and now I lost my train of thought what that was. But
I think that's great, and I think that's where, especially in the UK, I think that's where the government are doing really well in saying to people, look, you need to be aiming for 10,000 steps, you need to be getting up from your desk and walking. I think at a government major intervention level, that's actually really positive, because like you say, if we sit on our ass all day, it's not helping anyone.
Yeah. And that's the thing. It's like, and that's the thing is, I think some people tend to look at exercise as an excuse. Like they think, oh, I did my workout for the day. I can just, they kind of reward themselves by sitting around the rest of the day, and it doesn't work that way, you know. So, I know the other thing I want to mention is sleep, the importance of sleep. So, there's lots of good data showing if you don't get enough sleep, your appetite goes up and you eat more, and it may possibly impact your energy expenditure negatively in the sense that you're more tired and so you're less active. So sleep is really important. And then also I think from a something I think a lot of trainers don't talk about enough is psychological stress and its impacts. So there's a lot of good data that show that psychological stress affects appetite regulation. And obviously we know of people who turn to comfort foods when they're stressed out, things like that. We know that cortisol, which is released in response to stress, can have impacts on the brain, that it also will affect appetite regulation. So if we get beyond just it still comes down to calories in, calories out, but there are things affecting the calories in and things affecting the calories out that we should always be mindful of. And like I said, sleep, stress, NEAT, all those things can factor into a lot of those ultimately factor into the calories in, calories out type model. So.
Yeah, and the kind of psychological aspect of that is something that we've covered quite a lot recently on the podcast, because, people's attachment to food can be vast. And it all comes down to what's going in the head, why it's happening, why they have that attachment from, a reflex of dealing with, something that's happening in their life, self-worth issue, self-confidence issue, absolutely huge. And it is, I'd say it's a very in-depth topic. And I think, if anything, knowing what we know about the science of nutrition, for me, I feel knowing this area and how to combat is probably the next phase of what we as practitioners almost need to master to really help people.
Yeah, I would agree.
So James, thank you very much for your time today. It's been very valuable. You have your kids currently under bride downstairs watching Cinderella while you do this, so thank you very much. You'll be able to go and catch the end of it, which I believe is where they kiss and there's a happy ending.
Yes.
I would like people that would like to find your work to be able to find that after today. Where is the best place or places to send them if they're interested?
Yeah, so you can check out my website, Weightology.net, and I've got a lot of content on there. Other podcasts are on there. I've got a lot of nice free content, free articles on there. And then I also got a membership section where I do a lot of research reviews, video research reviews, feature articles. I have an Ask James section, so members can ask me questions, and I give detailed both written and video responses to those questions, that's where people can check me out and learn about me. And then I have links on my site to my Facebook page and my Instagram account and things like that. So
awesome. Well, please do go and check that out, especially if you are of the geeky inclination, because James's site is definitely a touch more geeky. But if you go on there, you're going to learn some cool stuff. Trust me, I've learned plenty from there. James, thank you very much for your time again today. Keep doing the work that you're doing. I think it's great. It's a great addition to the fitness industry. You are a great practitioner. And for everyone that's listening, please go and show James some love. When you see the show go up on Twitter and Facebook, interact, give James some feedback, ask a question, engage. There's no point having this stuff fall completely on deaf ears. Maybe let it spark the next conversation that you want to have on a personal level about weight, nutrition, science, whatever it is. So James, thanks again.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me.
And for everyone that's listening, have an awesome day, whatever you are doing, and I will see you on podcast 242. Who that guest will be, I'll have no idea. I'll sort my life out and get it done, but I will bring you another great episode next week. Goodbye. Hey everyone, Ben Coomber Radio, episode number 240. It is post-Christmas. We are